Welcome in here on this Tuesday, Southeastern 16, as we're going to talk some SEC football. Chase Robinson here. Got Chris Lee, Jay Greeson here as well as we spend the next little bit talking part two. We did this last week. We looked at 8 SEC teams and make or break games for 2025. We're going to look at the rest of the SEC teams today. So we'll take a look at Alabama, Oklahoma, Vanderbilt, Mississippi State, South Carolina, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, and Arkansas. And just dove into these teams' schedules, guys. There's some of these teams that it's going to be a tough 2025 for some of these teams coming up.
Chris, the game you cover the closest, that is a brutal slate that Vandy drew.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I think any SEC slate is brutal, but I do wonder a little bit in this redraw of schedules. It feels like some teams got the tougher end. Texas kind of got the red carpet treatment to getting in the league, among other things. Again, they're not easy, but yeah, some of these stand out as way more difficult than others.
And Chase, before you start the carousel moving, Chris, I couldn't agree with you more, because we've now gotten to a place that maybe the most important person in college football is your NIL treasurer. And the second most important person is the guy doing the schedule last December in Birmingham. Because with only the top 2 and no divisions and no checks and balances and no uniformity. See, all right, and you guys are going to come to know this about me. I'm kind of a theory guy. Here's my SEC plan of the future for the schedule. 4 pods: East, Central, Delta, West. Play everybody in that one. And then you take the 1 seed from each of the 4 pods, and you have conference semifinals.
Yeah.
And now you're talking about more paid for TV content. And everybody's going, well, what do you do on the last week of the schedule? You don't know who they play. The last week of the schedule before the conference championship, 2s play 2s, 3s plays 3s, 4s play 4s.
Yeah.
And that way, there's some uniformity. You've got an idea. It's easier for the fans. Hey, at some point in time, you think it was bad that the SEC women's number 1 seed was decided by a coin flip? Wait till we get to at the end of the season, and Kirby Smart's got to play rock, paper, scissors with with Brian Kelly to see who's in the 2 seed.
Yeah, I mean, when are we going to make you commissioner, Jay?
Well, I'll take one Mr. Greg Sankey's check any day of the week.
Yes, I think any of us would. That is for sure.
Man, I'd last 48 seconds in that job. I'd walk in and tell some sort of joke about some sort of heavy person, and then the next thing you know, they run me out on the rails, and everybody goes, well, he sounded good on paper, but, that fat joke got everybody in trouble.
We'll keep you out of there then. We'll just keep you with us. How about that?
Fair enough.
Let's take a look at some make or break games for 8 SEC teams. I want to start with Alabama here, and this one's interesting to me because I feel like there's several on this schedule for Alabama. I think as far as SEC play goes, obviously they have Florida State to start things off. That is Wisconsin as well in non-conference. But you start out SEC play at Georgia, and I think that could be a game for Alabama. They were able to win that one last year. Yeah, it didn't propel them to the season they wanted, but I feel like that was a good, hey, let's make a statement in this game starting SEC play. I think another big one's going to be going to South Carolina as well. So I think starting off, though, at Georgia is going to be huge for Alabama to start off the SEC schedule.
Mine, I've done a lot of things since we talked about this a week ago today. And I think Chris makes a very valid point, especially in the age of a 12-team playoff and moving forward. Those openers, I overstated them last week. I don't know how good Florida State's going to be. I think Wisconsin's going to be kind of a puppet. I'm going here. I'm going the Iron Bowl at Auburn because I think Kalen DeBoer could have some loose lug nuts by the end of this run. And if there are so few universal truths in sports. Don't leave Steph Curry open. Don't insult Tiger Woods. And don't be the guy following the guy. And Kalen DeBoer is the guy following the guy. And, I mean, you go rolling into Lee County, Alabama at 7-4, and Auburn handles you. You about to have a really rocky offseason, bro.
Yeah, I'm looking at this schedule, and I don't even know where to start with the pick, because Florida State and Tallahassee, like if that's in Tuscaloosa, I like Alabama to win it. I'm not entirely sure what Florida State's got. I'm doing some Googles for preseason top 25, not finding the Seminoles in there. It's been a tale of two different seasons. I think Wisconsin and Tuscaloosa, another one, like Wisconsin in another day and age, was a perennial top 25 program not that long ago. Alabama handled them very easily a year ago, but it's a different year. I think, to me, this is a tough one. I mean, you could say Georgia and Athens, but like, I don't know that that's one that you're expected to win. I mean, I say that Alabama, I think you're expected to win every week, but realistically, it might be a different story. Vanderbilt and Tuscaloosa, we know how that one went last year. I think Alabama will be up for that one. I suspect we'll get a different outcome there. Maybe Missouri and Columbia would be one, because it's right before Tennessee. And goodness, then you got this schedule, guys, brutal. South Carolina and Columbia. I mean, my goodness, I'm just thinking out loud here. Put Alabama in the clubhouse maybe as the early leader for the toughest schedule in the country. But I think Missouri and Columbia is one. Like, I think that's going to be my guess. By default.
Before we hop off this Alabama lily pad, as we talked last week, it felt like Tennessee and Georgia and maybe Missouri and even like a Texas A&M, or I guess maybe a Texas, or all the folks that they had on a daunting slate, it felt like half of them had open weeks before they played Bama.
Yeah. And that was the case last year. But I do think Alabama's schedule is really interesting, because it's an important year for Kalen DeBoer, and we don't usually say that going into year two, but we are. This is an important year, I think, for Kalen DeBoer this year. So it will be interesting for Alabama. Next team I want to look at is Oklahoma, and this one was another tough one for me to go through and figure out what a make or break game is. I feel like there's a lot of them. This is just a very important year for Brent Venables and company there. Like he's got to win. He's got to win some SEC games. He's got to get this thing going in the right direction. They were 2-6, in SEC play last year. But I think the game at South Carolina is big. That is on the road, tough place to play. I think Ole Miss coming to Norman is big. You end the season with LSU. I think that may be make or break, because it's at the end of the year. LSU, I think, is going to be pretty good. If Oklahoma they've got that one in Norman. If they can get a win there, like I think that could propel them to what they want to be, get them maybe to the 7 wins, I think, at that point.
Well, I owe our viewers an apology, because I left off a couple of guaranteed rules in sports, and I'm going to quote my man, Coach Bobby Finstock from Teen Wolf here. You never play cards with a guy nicknamed after a city. Never date a woman with a tattoo of a dagger anywhere on her body. Always get 12 hours of sleep, and everything after that is cream cheese. So for me, this one is maybe the easiest one we've done over the last 8 days. Brent Venables will not make it through the end of the season if Jackson Arnold comes to Norman, Oklahoma, and Auburn beats them. If Jackson Arnold is the QB1 for the Auburn Tigers and he comes in there and lights Brent Venables' defense up, I don't see how he's going to be recruiting come December in 2025. At least not for Norman, not for the Oklahoma Sooners.
I think Jay's right. The other one I look at is that Ole Miss game in Norman, because you're in a stretch where, holy smokes, you've got Texas and Dallas, South Carolina and Columbia, then that Ole Miss game at home, then you go to Knoxville to get Tennessee. Like, that feels like the easiest win. Not that any of them are easy in that stretch. You don't want to be on a 4-game losing streak coming out of Knoxville, and that looks like your best opportunity to get one.
Yeah, it's very true. And how about staying on Oklahoma for a second? How about the hire of Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl to come be the general manager at Oklahoma? I think that's big. I mean, and from what I read, like, even if Venables was to go, he can stay. He's not part of the staff per se. And so I think that's huge for Oklahoma to have a guy like that with all those connections.
Well, I also think it is the modern, and to circle back to the first name we mentioned really today, Kalen DeBoer brought his general manager with him from Washington. And we used to be in a place, and it was not that long ago, that all these programs had director of football ops. And these were the guys who carried itineraries and made certain you knew which joke to tell at which rubber chicken dinner you were for a booster club. Now, these guys are true GMs. I mean, Belichick's first hire was former NFL GM Mike Lombardi. I mean, these guys now are neck deep in roster management. Now, certainly the college coach has always been his own GM because he recruits. He's the guy, as Parcells famously said, if you want me to cook the meal, go let me buy the groceries. So the college coaches do that. But with NIL and the salary juggling that these guys have to do, they've got to have a GM like a Jim Nagy, or there are a lot of these guys who are getting big-time football names to run the business side of the inside of the program.
Well, that was smart of Oklahoma, too, to do it that way, because if you were a guy, I would think that's a pretty stable position. I felt like he was associated with the Senior Bowl for a long, long time. I don't know how long that relationship goes back, but if you're going to get me out of one of those, unless I'm just really unhappy and looking to leave, I'm not coming to join a staff where I think that the coach is a lame duck and I'm searching for a job in another year. So very smart of them to tie that to the program and maybe not the coach.
Yeah, I thought that was a very smart move on their part. Moving on to the Vanderbilt Commodores. Obviously, history made last season with Vanderbilt. I think the back-to-back games of LSU and Missouri, they're both at home. You're coming off a trip to Tuscaloosa, and after Missouri, a trip to Texas. But you got LSU and Missouri right there between at home. Like, I feel like that's the part of the schedule for Vanderbilt that you got to win some of these games, especially, again, coming off the trip to Alabama. You're going to Texas. Those two right there, I think, are big for Vanderbilt.
Chris, go ahead. You know this program better than the rest of us.
Well, I'm having a hard time with this one, and let me just bookend the discussion because I think the discussion starts with what is Vanderbilt, okay? Jay, the win totals came out. I don't remember if it was at FanDuel or where, but did you catch Vanderbilt's over/under on a win total?
I did, and I was going to reference it if you didn't.
Yeah, well, it's 3, and look, I don't bet, but if I did, that feels like that might be a place to start because the schedule starts with Charleston Southern. You get Virginia Tech, South Carolina, but then you get Georgia State, and of course, insert the punchline about last year there, and Utah State. But I feel like they're going to win 3 of those 5 right there. If they don't, things are going to have gone horribly wrong, and then you just got to get one more somewhere else. Now, that's one bookend. I'm just searching because what I find useful in these things, I can't keep up anymore. Like used to be, you felt like you had a good idea whether Michigan or Ohio State was going to be good because they were a team returning a bunch of juniors or seniors or whatever. Now, who knows because of the portal. So I'm Googling top 25s for preseason. And I stumble upon this. I had not seen this till just now. Way too early top 25 at NCAA.com. There sits Vanderbilt at number 24, which I find interesting because there's a big discrepancy between that and the win total at 3. So I think you have to answer what is Vanderbilt. If you think it's a 3-win total team, then the games I would circle are probably Virginia Tech and Blacksburg in week 2, maybe Kentucky in the next to last week before you play Tennessee, maybe Auburn. Those would appear to be some of the easier, no offense to Jay, games on the schedule on paper at this point. If your aspirations are a little bit higher, you think they're closer to a top 25 team, I think that feels a little aggressive. But I think you have to look at Missouri and Nashville as one of those games that maybe at that point is super intriguing. And Vanderbilt's won a couple of those against Missouri in its backyard.
I think I completely agree with your line of reasoning, and you phrased it very articulately. I, of course, am going to go to a movie quote and be Rob Schneider's character in Waterboy. Oh no, we stink again! And if they start 0-3, even with Diego Pavia, and everybody looks up and goes, "Oh yeah, I forgot we were Vandy," and then. I mean, I completely agree. I think the biggest game for them is, and they may not win it because Blacksburg is a awesome place to A, watch a football game, and B, a very difficult place to have success. But you start with that schedule 0-3, and they're going to be, the first one is Charleston Southern. If you're 1-2. If you come out 2-1, because you should beat Charleston Southern, but if you can split that Virginia Tech and South Carolina, then I think top 25 is in the conversation. Certainly another bowl run, and certainly enough to clear that over/under of 3 on a win total.
Yeah, that's for sure. Interesting there.
Chase, I have a question for you because this may say, what do we think Missouri is? Because I'm looking at the preseason rankings. I'm not seeing Missouri on ESPN. I'm not seeing them on the NCAAs. That's a little surprising. I thought that was a team that might be preseason top 25.
Nah, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think we're going to see a drop-off, honestly, in Missouri. Like, Bo Perbula, he's all right. You know, I think he's really going to have to settle into that starting quarterback role, and he's going to have to settle in fast. They don't quite have the receivers that they did. Losing Brady Cook is going to be not good for Missouri. I think this year.
Yeah. Fair.
Next up, let's talk Mississippi State. And look, this is a brutal schedule for the Bulldogs. Obviously, no wins in SEC play last year. They're staring down the face of another really tough schedule. I had trouble with this because I feel like when you look at it, taking care of business in the non-conference games are going to be important. You have Arizona State coming into Starkville. I feel like maybe trip to Arkansas could be a win. Maybe a trip to Missouri if they end up not being very good. But the rest, I mean, it's brutal.
And maybe the die is cast for whatever they're going to be, but not unlike what I said for Kalen DeBoer about the Iron Bowl. Everything you said, Chase, is spot on. The non-conference will be huge, especially with those games in Starkville. But give me the Egg Bowl here. I mean, we've seen how many times have we seen coaches who have underachieved figure out ways to beat your rival, and you get an extra year, I think make or break, the definition of make or break for really both the Magnolia State schools is the Egg Bowl.
Yeah, I think that's ultimately the right answer. I'm going to pull a Jay Greeson here and go old school movie quotes. Boy, when Jeff Lebby got his first 2 schedules, that had to feel like a somebody sure hates these oil cans moment for him. I mean, you look at the teams they're playing. They get Arizona State week 2. I think that might be your other sleeper game. I don't know what ASU is this year, but if you want to look at it from the positive momentum standpoint, you beat ASU in Starkville in week 2, a team that was in the college football playoff a year ago. People are going to be feeling a little bit better about that. That's a game you were close in the year before, although it was kind of over at half and the score was misleading. I watched a lot of that one, but that might be one that you circle and say, hey, look, if they pull an upset there early, that gives a little bit of a dose of momentum and some feel good to a program that hasn't had one in a few minutes.
All right, Chase, I'm going to accept Chris's challenge, and I will now work a quote from Steve Martin's classic, The Jerk, into every segment I speak.
There's many to choose from, Jay.
There are.
Next up, South Carolina. I don't know how make or break this is. I think this would be huge, though, to make the season for South Carolina when Alabama comes to Columbia. Columbia is a tough place to play. Alabama, obviously, South Carolina, close game this year. That just to me, and I think Alabama is going to be much better than they were last year. I just feel like that's a game that is very winnable for South Carolina because it's at your place. They want to win that game so bad. I don't have the date in front of me whenever Alabama comes. So I think that could be it for South Carolina. You win that game, and that can definitely propel you the rest of the year.
Well, I'm a little perplexed that you think Alabama, South Carolina is winnable, but you think Alabama is going to be better this year. And because then I'm going to ask, how far do you think either one of these teams are going? And I'm going to say to the end of that fence. And, oh, yeah, hey, brother, I am covered in them. Believe me.
Yep.
But I don't really know. Is there a game, considering what they've just pumped into Beamer Ball and the fun they had in the back half of last year, is there a game that could break South Carolina this year? In the conversation of make and break. I mean, that's a kind of a good problem to have, but you just ponied up a whole bunch of money. The schedule's doable. I mean, in the sense, yeah, the SEC schedule's tough, but you get Clemson at home, you get Alabama at home, you get Oklahoma at home. You handle your business at home, split on the road with at Missouri and maybe at an Ole Miss team.
I'll give you one.
Go.
You lose to Kentucky in week 5. You got a week off to think about going to Baton Rouge. Now, look, having said that, this program always closes like a freight train, right? And so whatever you see out of South Carolina the first half of the season, you can kind of disregard because Shane Beamer always has them being better. But at the same time, that doesn't do much for morale if you lose to a Kentucky team at home where people think Kentucky's now in a down cycle and then a couple of weeks to dwell on it before going to a potential top 5 LSU team 2 weeks later.
No, yeah. And I'm interested, Jay, like what do you think of South Carolina this year?
Well, they're going to have to replace a whole lot of their strength. But I will say this. Every single time we wonder if they're going to have just a bona fide NFL dude in the front 7, they get some cat from like close to from mid-state South Carolina who's been sweating in pads. And we think, you know what? He's not a bum. He's a jerk. And he doesn't have anything. But he once had wealth and power. And now all he's got are his friends and a thermos. But their quarterback is legit, man. And if we're talking football in March, and I can check the quarterback box, that not only do I have a quarterback I believe in, but he does the things I want in a quarterback. If you're a drop back passing team and you feel good about it, great. If you're a game manager system like Georgia needs when you've got all that talent that Kirby collects, great. And you want to do what Beamer likes to do, and you've got this kid, great. I mean, I think the schedule is pretty doable.
Yeah.
To your point, Chris, yeah, I guess I was wrong because if you lose to Kentucky, it breaks the season because you weren't as good as we thought you were.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, you have left this here for me for the taking. Jay, I swore you were going there and you did not. But let's think like a Gamecock fan for a minute, shall we? Because I'm just going to give you this. All the Gamecocks need is this ashtray, this paddle game, the remote control, the lamp, and a win over Clemson. And it's all well.
And my faithful dog, Lifesaver, which is his name
Right.
in the edited movie.
Yes, I don't think his name was Lifesaver in the one I saw.
It's not.
All right.
All right, Chase is going, hey, will you old guys shut up?
I know.
Let's talk football.
Chase, if you haven't seen The Jerk, then do yourself a favor in
I have not.
your frequent downtime. I say that sarcastically.
Yes, I'll add that to the list.
It'll all make sense.
Next up, let's talk Texas A&M. Year 2 for Mike Elko. I think trip to Notre Dame could be big. Week 3. That was the opener last year. They dropped it in College Station. You go up there. That one could be big. I think the very next week, first SEC game, hosting Auburn. Remembering what Auburn did last year, I think that could be a make for the season for Texas A&M, starting off SEC play with a win over the Auburn Tigers.
I think you're spot on. I think it is Auburn, and it's the next game. It's not the next week. They get a week off after Notre Dame. But right. It is even if you stumble at Notre Dame, you haven't lost in the conference. But then I think you really got to feel, if you're Texas A&M, you need to go through the last Saturday in September. You got 3 straight home games there: Auburn, Mississippi State, and Florida. And if you want to be what Texas A&M expects to be and what Texas A&M spins to be, you need to come out of that 3-0, or Mike Elko, with his spectacles on the sidelines, is going to say, "Damn these glasses," and the entire fan base is going to say, "I damn thee."
Yes, that's all true. How do I recover from that? I got one for you. This is thinking outside the box a little bit, okay? And Chase, I want to hear what you think on this one. Well, one I thought about was Notre Dame, right? Because if you want to go feel really good about yourselves, you go to South Bend and you get one there early, you're feeling great about things. But I'm circling the Florida game in the middle. Because let's say you lose that one. Then you start thinking, well, let's remember back to last year when we went down to the Swamp and we dominated them. And let's look at a year later. Are we getting any better? You lose that one, you're saying, hey, everybody was down on Florida in that program. But since then, we've not gotten any better. To me, that just losing that game in your backyard over a team you dominated a year ago, if that were to happen, that invites a lot of comparisons that you really don't want.
No, I wrote down Florida as number 2 on my list when I was going through these games. I think that's a very important one, because I do think Florida is going to be capable of winning more games this year. I feel like what we saw towards the end, maybe they can sustain that all season long at Florida this year. I think that's definitely an important game. That could be one for Texas A&M. You lose that one, and there's some things to figure out.
Yeah. And quickly before we turn the page, is there a bigger make or break player than Marcel Reed? And I don't know, because his ceiling is limitless. There were at times against Auburn that he looked like a peak Charlie Ward. But if he does not progress, then you're looking at a whole lot of big dollar talent. And for $1, I'll guess your weight, your height, and your sex. But if Marcel Reed does not grow, I don't really know how good they can be.
Yeah, he's going to be very important.
Chase, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Chris.
I was leading to where you were going. When you did your SEC quarterback rankings, where did you put him? Because I feel like that's one we had a discussion about. Because I think Jay brings up a really good point there. Because the difference between the floor and the ceiling there, I feel like, is going to be one of the bigger spreads in the league.
Yeah, I had him right in the middle of the pack at 8.
Okay. Yeah, you split the difference, and
because I really don't know what to expect from him.
And I probably
game in
too.
and game out.
Yeah.
All right, moving on. Ole Miss, the Rebels, coming into 2025. I think once again, pretty manageable schedule for Ole Miss. Last year they didn't completely take advantage of it. I think a big win for them. There's a couple that come to my mind as I look at this. Obviously, I think going to Georgia could be huge for Ole Miss if they won that one. Florida, hosting Florida towards the end of the season. Again, we know what happened in that one last year. If Ole Miss has their back against the wall, they need to win those games down the stretch, and they couldn't do that last year. So I think Florida could be a big one. And then kind of off Jay's point earlier, Mississippi State into the season with those guys on the road in Starkville.
I think we talk about a bunch, well, at least today we have the guy who has pen in hand and makes these schedules. Ole Miss has a very doable schedule. I mean, 3 of their 4 SEC road games are against Oklahoma, Mississippi State, and Kentucky, and that was 3 of the 4 worst SEC teams in the league last year, right? So, I mean, I don't know if they go into it, but I mean, if Lane Kiffin doesn't make the most of this, because I think the quarterback now, I think they're going to be fine at quarterback. He's going to have to replace a whole lot of dudes on the defensive line. And you can't look and find a cosmetologist because that's unbelievable. It must be tough handling all the weightlessness. Chris, if we've got any fans of the movie The Jerk watching, they're
either people have just completely turned us out, or they're on the save wave leak. There's no in between here. I think, to me, and again, like Jay hinted, the schedule gods have just done them a solid. But it's a lot like last year's schedule, right? Where like you got a lot of games that you should win, and they did win by a lot of points, and then they stubbed their toe one place they couldn't afford to against Kentucky. That was that. To me, I think they got a great shot to be 4-0 headed into LSU, and that game is in Oxford. I circle the games that look easily losable. It's LSU and Oxford. It's Georgia and Athens. It's South Carolina and Oxford. Maybe Florida and Oxford, and Mississippi State and Starkville. Pattern here, a lot of those, the tougher ones at home. To me, I think if you beat LSU in week 5, you go 5-0. That's got a pretty good feel to it. If you lose that, it starts to feel a little bit like last year where, you took care of business against all the teams you should have taken care of business and in spectacular fashion, except for one, but you couldn't beat the big boys. To me, you beat LSU and Oxford, you feel great about it. If you don't, it starts to be the can Lane Kiffin win the big one narrative again, which I don't know would be entirely unfair.
No, yeah, I don't think it would be at all. I think a very interesting year upcoming for Ole Miss. And our final team, we'll discuss make or break games, the Arkansas Razorbacks. Once again, pretty tough schedule for the Hogs. Interesting non-conference game with Notre Dame right there, middle of the season. They start off with Alabama A&M. I think getting one of these games at home could be big for Arkansas, kind of like they did last year, getting that big win against Tennessee at home, maybe like a A&M or I think Mississippi State's winnable for Arkansas, or an LSU at home. I think that could really make the year if they're able to get one of these big games at home and get a win.
I'm going to go off the board here, and I'm going to pick out a thermos for you. Not an ordinary thermos for you, but the extra best thermos that you can buy with vinyl stripes and a cup built right in. I think it's at Memphis because I mean, I think that's a sneaky hot seat with fans with sneaky high expectations. And Memphis is always one of those spear throwing hunters in the old school caveman movies that can take you out when you're least expecting it from like 40 yards away. And that schedule's not easy. You talk about circling losable games, Chris, there's a bunch of them on that slate. And you let your guard down knowing you've got Notre Dame at home the next week and you lose at Memphis, and here comes everybody, because God knows the Lord loves a working man.
The Lord does love a working man, and Sam Pittman has got his work cut out for him with Ole Miss, Notre Dame, Tennessee, A&M, LSU, Texas, all potential top 25 teams. To me, it's do you take care of business in those other games? I think Memphis is a defensible pick, but like it feels like Sam Pittman ends up on this verge of 500 every year heading into the finale, and then you got Missouri and Fayetteville. You win that one, you get bowl eligible, you feel better about things, maybe stays another year. You lose that one, you fall under 500. Feels like a tenure that everybody's been speculating for 3 years was going to come to an end, probably does. So, Chase, I'm telling you what, none of these today were easy. None of these today were easy. This one included, but that's my guess just based kind of on the way his tenure's gone.
Yeah, and you're right. None of these were easy. I had a hard time going through these this morning and figuring this out. But should be a fun some of these games as we look at these SEC teams. And again, spring practice starting for some teams. Others will be cranking up soon. We discussed last week the spring games. We're now up to 2 in the SEC that aren't being played at all. That's Texas and Missouri. Alabama put out at the end of last week. We're going to have a little spring practice that people come watch, but there's no live TV broadcast of it. So I think we'll see that with more teams. Yeah, with that. Hey, fans can come watch or come in person, and watch us run some drills. But it's not going to be on TV, and it's going to be nothing more than running some drills. It's not going to be a scrimmage or anything.
Chase, I want to ask you this. We've been through all the schedules now. Who do you think got the easy end and the tough end of these?
I think definitely Ole Miss has a pretty easy one. Texas again, it looks pretty good for them. Tennessee, I think they got a good schedule to me. Now, Mississippi State, that's brutal. Oklahoma, brutal. Florida, even though I feel like Florida can manage it better or has shown that they can manage a hard schedule, it's still theirs is very difficult again. So I think those 3, Mississippi State, Oklahoma, Florida, Arkansas, and maybe Arkansas more so than Florida. It's going to be tough. It's going to be really tough for them to manage it.
Yeah, I go ahead, Jay.
Go ahead,
sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that the one Alabama just stands out to me as unusually tough. Now you do get some of the tougher games at home, which helps. But I mean, man, you got to face Georgia, you got to face Tennessee, South Carolina, LSU. You got the Iron Bowl, and oh, by the way, in between you get Florida State and Wisconsin, which both those could be top 25 level teams, maybe depending on what they did or didn't do in the portal. And I'm kind of with you. I think Texas, although, starting off with Ohio State and Columbus, that's a card it dealt itself there that maybe it didn't have to. Tennessee's, I think, again, probably one of the ones I look at as one of the easier ones. Now, the difference between this year and last year, I think that some of the games that are distinctly different games depending on venue are Alabama and Florida, and those are both on the road this year for them. So that's one big difference from last year, but that's kind of how I see them.
And I think it's a great question. And I agree, Ole Miss, just because I don't think it is – you're not looking at your road slate and thinking, well, that's 3 guaranteed losses and we're going to hope to keep the other one close. Because all of the term difficult schedule is in the margins in the SEC. I mean, it's anything between the ashtray and the thimbles, anything in this 3 inches here that includes the chiclets but not the erasers. So I'm going to say the toughest belongs to Arkansas because they've got 6 teams that won 10 games last year. And if you expect those teams to continue that type of success, you got to sweep the rest of them to just be bowl eligible.
Yeah. Comment there.
That's one of the points I was trying to make earlier. Yeah. Yeah,
that's very true. Any parting thoughts from you guys as we get ready to wrap up?
No, I can't promise that the next movie that Chris quotes I'm going to be that well versed in. So, but as always, fun pulling up a chair with you guys, Chase, Chris.
You know, I didn't know I'd set you up that well, but I had a pretty strong suspicion. And Chase, I think you know your homework assignment without even having it told to you.
Well, I've told many people that I've wasted $1 million memory on movie quotes, baseball batting averages, and SEC winning percentages. So
yeah,
I guess that's why we're sitting here at 12:43 on a Tuesday, and I'm not going into a courtroom chit-chatting about the toughest schedules in the SEC. What do you think?
Sure. We'll take it.
Well, appreciate you guys. Thank you to everyone watching. We will do this again Thursday as we'll continue to talk SEC football all through the spring, summer, get you ready for the season. Again, spring practices starting, and we'll be talking about some specific teams as spring practice gets rolling and all that. So be on the lookout. Again, Southeastern 16, we cover all of it, SEC football, basketball, baseball going on right now. So subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll talk to you next time here on Southeastern 16.